December 7th, 2025 morning, a group of soldiers walks onto Benin state television. They announce the president has been removed, constitution suspended, borders closed. By evening, ECOWAS troops are packing their bags, not to condemn, not to sanction, to deploy. Now, here's what makes this wild. For the past 5 years, ECOWAS has watched military takeover after military takeover in Niger, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and ECOWAS threatened military action every single time. They never followed through, not even once. So what changed in Benin? Why did a regional bloc that couldn't stop military takeovers in 3 Sahel countries suddenly mobilize for one failed attempt in less than 24 hours? Now, before I break this down, quick question. Do you think ECOWAS is defending democracy or defending specific presidents? Now, drop your take in the comments, because by the end of this video, you might change your answer. Now, let's rewind, because to understand what happened in Benin, you need to see the chess game that's been playing out across West Africa. Now, let me walk you through December 7th, minute by minute, because the speed of this tells you everything about what's really at stake. Early morning, Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigri and a group of soldiers seize the state broadcaster. They go live. President Patrice's talon has been removed, they say. We are closing borders. We are suspending the constitution. Now, according to reports from Reuters and Al Jazeera, gunfire echoed through Cotonou. 2 senior officers were taken hostage. But here's where it gets interesting. Within hours, not days, hours, Benin's Interior Minister Alassane Seydou makes his own announcements. Coup attempt foiled. Everyone, go about your business. Then Patrice Talon appeared himself on TV, calm, collected, promises justice for what he calls treachery. But that's not even the most surprising part. That same evening, before most of us heard about the military takeover attempt, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, issues an order. Not a statement, an order. Deploy elements of the standby force from Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone to Benin immediately. Now, this hasn't happened before. Not for Niger, not for Mali, not for Guinea, not for Burkina Faso. And all these countries I just mentioned, they got sanctions, got suspensions. They got speeches about restoring constitutional order. They didn't get troops. So what made Benin different? And more importantly, what does this tell us about who ECOWAS actually or really protects? Now hold that thought, because in a few minutes I'm going to show you data that suggests ECOWAS and the African Union have been playing a very selective game when it comes to defending democracy. And once you see it, this whole situation about Benin starts to look very different. Alright, let's zoom out, because Benin didn't happen in a vacuum. Between 2019 and 2023, we saw more than 10 attempted military takeovers across Africa. They formed what analysts started calling the Coup belt. This band running from Guinea in the west through Mali and Burkina Faso across to Sudan in the east. And here is the pattern. Young officers, frustrated publics, governments accused of corruption or being too close to former colonial powers. Then the military sets in, promising to save the nation. Now, there is a Bambara proverb from Mali. When the shepherd is careless, the hyena comes bold. Well, West Africa has been watching a lot of bold hyenas lately. Now, here is where it gets messy for ECOWAS. Every time there was a military takeover, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, ECOWAS came down hard. Sanctions, suspensions, border closures, and threats of military intervention. Threats they never actually carried out. But here is what researchers at The Conversation found when they analyzed the African Union's response to unconstitutional changes of government between 2011 and 2023. They categorized these changes into three types. 1. Here, soldiers overthrow elected governments. 2. Incumbents refusing to leave after losing elections. And 3. Presidents changing the constitution to extend their term limits. According to the 2007 African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Good Governance, all three are considered unconstitutional. The African Union is supposed to exert or apply the same amount of pressure when any of them are violated. But guess what? In 17 out of 20 classic military takeovers, the AU applied the full sanction toolkit: suspensions, sanctions, pressure to restore order. But when presidents in Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Togo, Chad, when they changed constitutions to stay in power or refuse to concede elections, crickets. And this is where the Benin story gets really interesting, because President Patrice Talon, he's been accused by opposition groups of exactly that kind of manipulation, restricting opposition, changing electoral rules. So when ECOWAS rushed to defend him with actual troops, not just statements, a lot of people started asking questions. Are you defending democracy, or are you defending your friends? Now pause the video for a second. Based on what you know so far, what do you think ECOWAS is actually protecting here? Now comment democracy or incumbents. Let's see where this community lands. Now here is where most coverage of the Benin military takeover attempt missed. And honestly, this is where the real strategy reveals itself. Now remember how I said ECOWAS threatened military intervention in Niger but never followed through? Well, in 2024, Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso didn't just ignore those threats. They quit ECOWAS, formed their own bloc called the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. ECOWAS lost 3 members, lost credibility, lost the entire Sahel region to a counter-alliance that's now cozying up to Russia, looking at alternative currencies, rejecting French military presence. So by December 2025, ECOWAS is facing an existential crisis. If the military takeover belt reaches the coast, if it hits Benin, Togo, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, the organization is done. These coastal states, they are the gateway, they are where the ports are, where the trade routes connect to the Sahel, where France and the US still have military agreements and economic interests. Now, according to analysis from ISS Africa and defense think tanks, there has been a quiet understanding between Western powers and ECOWAS leadership. The Sahel might be lost, but cannot fall. So when soldiers walked into that TV station in Benin on December 7th, they weren't just threatening President Talon, they were threatening the entire post-Sahel strategy. And that's why ECOWAS moved in less than 24 hours. Not because Benin is special, not because Talon is particularly democratic, or because he has very beautiful eyes. Because Benin is the test case. If they can show that attempting a military takeover in a coastal ECOWAS state means immediate regional military response, maybe, just maybe, they can stop the dominoes before they hit Accra, Lomé or Abidjan. Now, my grandmother used to say, the chicken that refuses to listen will follow the hen that enters the pot. ECOWAS is trying to make sure that every military commander in West Africa, sees what happened to those soldiers in Benin. Now, here's where it gets complicated, because not everyone sees it this way. A lot of African analysts and citizens are asking, where was this energy for the people of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso? When those countries had military takeovers, ECOWAS imposed sanctions that hurt ordinary people, closed borders, restricted trade, made life harder for citizens who were already suffering under corrupt governments. But they never sent troops to protect those governments. They never mobilized the standby force. So critics have a point when they say ECOWAS protects coastal pro-Western governments but abandoned the Sahel. And that's perception. It's dangerous because it fits the narrative that regional bodies don't serve African interest. They serve whoever controls the ports and the trade routes. But there is one more layer to all this that nobody's talking about, and it might be the most important piece of all. Now, remember when I mentioned those three types of unconstitutional changes? Military takeovers, refusing election results, and manipulating constitutions? Well, researchers have a term for numbers 2 and 3. Now, they are when presidents use legal mechanisms, changing term limits, stacking courts, rewriting electoral rules to stay in power indefinitely. Now, according to the Conversations analysis, looking at data from 2019 to 2023, here's what happened. When military staged classic takeovers, the AU responded with full sanctions in 17 out of 20 cases. When presidents manipulated constitutions or refused to concede elections, the African Union applied equivalent sanctions in exactly 0 cases. Now, why does that matter for Benin? Because multiple analyses have pointed out that President Talon has been accused of the exact kind of democratic backsliding that in other contexts has eventually triggered military intervention. Restricted opposition, control who runs in elections, tighten media regulations. Now, does that justify military takeover? Absolutely not. Military takeovers are not the answer. But here is the question no one wants to ask out loud. If ECOWAS and the AU had been as strict about presidents bending democratic rules as they are about soldiers breaking them, would we be having a coup belt? Think about it. Mali's military takeover in 2020 came after President Keita manipulated parliamentary elections. Niger's came years of President Bazoum's predecessor changing rules. Burkina Faso's followed a president who overstayed his welcome. They staged them when people are already fed up with leaders who won't leave. And that brings us back to Benin and a question that's going to define West Africa's next few years. So where does this leave us? Benin's military takeover attempt failed. ECOWAS troops are there. President Talon is secured. On the surface, this looks like a win for regional stability and constitutional order. But zoom out and you see something more complicated. ECOWAS proved it can act when it wants to. That's not nothing. After years of empty threats in the Sahel, they finally deployed the standby force. That sends a signal. But they also proved that they will act selectively. Coastal states get troops. Sahel states got sanctions that hurt ordinary people, but not the leaders. And yet they still haven't addressed the elephant in the room. Constitutional takeovers. The legal manipulations that create the conditions for military takeovers. to take place in the first place. Experts at the ISS Africa and the conversation are clear about what needs to happen. 1. Foster real democratic future. Independent courts, free media, strong parliaments that actually check executive power. 2. Set clear hard rules on constitutional changes and term limits. Make them enforceable. 3. Apply firm sanctions to civilian leaders who manipulate the law, not just to juntas. Otherwise, you get this: a regional body that defends presidents, not democracy. That protects institutions, but not the people those institutions are supposed to serve. There is an Akan proverb that says, "The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people." But I would add, the ruin of a nation begins when its institutions choose sides instead of principles. So here is what I think we should be watching in 2026. Benin's presidential election in April. If it's seen as free and fair, great. If it's not, and people feel ECOWAS protected a president who then rigged his own succession, all that goodwill from supporting a military takeover evaporates. Also, watch how ECOWAS handles the next constitutional crisis. Will they sanction a president who tries to change term limits? Or will they wait until the military steps in and send troops? And also watch the AES bloc. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso didn't leave ECOWAS just to come back. They are building an alternative vision. Whether it succeeds or fails will shape the next decade of West African politics. Look, I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. This is messy, complicated, and it's unfolding in real time. But what I do know is this: Benin didn't just experience a failed military takeover. It became a test case for whether West Africa can build institutions that serve people, not just protect presidents. And the next few years are going to show us which path the region chooses. So here is my question for you. If you are advising ECOWAS right now, what will be your first move? Constitutional reforms? Election monitoring? Sanctions on term limit manipulation? Drop your strategy in the comments. And if you found this analysis useful, share it with someone who still thinks African politics is simple. It's anything but. I'm breaking down these strategic moves every week on The Strategic Lens. I'm Asongwe Luis. See you in my next video. Bye.